Hello everybody and welcome to Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. I'm Jack, and if you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the latest set, Astral Radiance, make sure you check out the Pokemon store where you can get 5% off your order using code Omnipoke. Today we're going to be having a look at the Bremen Regional and Vancouver Regional results that took place this weekend. We're wrapping up the Brilliant Stars format now. There's only one more weekend where Brilliant Stars, or until Astral Radiance is legal, and that's next weekend. So this was the penultimate weekend in terms of tournaments, and we have the top 8s for both Bremen and Vancouver to take a look at. We haven't quite got all of the lists of the top 8 from Bremen, but we do have all 8 lists from Vancouver. Kicking these off with Bremen, myself and Joe attended. We had a great time. Neither of us was able to make day 2, but we had plenty of fun, and we were able to witness Philip Schultz doing his thing once again, turning up to a regionals. Didn't even have his invite at this point, and ended up winning the whole thing. So congratulations, Philip. It was great to watch him play throughout the weekend, playing a really interesting Arceus Cincino build with Jolteon. So we've seen Arceus Jolteon plus a partner, been pretty popular over the past couple of weeks, typically with Bibarel. But instead, Philip decided to play it with Cincinos. Obviously, Cincino has Corporal Family, which helps build up your board in the early turns. More draw power is obviously great as well. I actually prefer Cincino to Bibarel in a lot of decks anyway, but it's it's more gradual cards over time rather than like a burst of cards like the Bibarel is. So there's definitely pros and cons, but I really like Cincino at the moment. And yeah, then just in general, trying to out-resource people with Arceus. You've got 4 Path to the Peak, you've got Big Charms and Sharon's Cares, and then a Pal Pad, and you're just trying to be this big 310 HP 2-prizer that your opponent really struggles to deal with. All of these supporters that you can use alongside Cincino to still be drawing cards, so you can still Boss, you can still Sharon, all of this stuff. Seems like a really, really interesting archetype. I actually like this. I played Arceus, Jolteon, Malamar at the weekend. I actually want to try this out because this intrigues me a little bit in terms of being sort of a strong contender for a non-Inteleon based Arceus engine. I really like it. So going to be giving this one a go. Cool to see innovation still happening even towards the end of a format. Shows how flexible and versatile Arceus is as a card. But yeah, congratulations, Philip. It was a fantastic result. Kai Wainwright from the UK was able to finish in second place. We don't actually have his list here, but we can see that Kai also did really well at the special event Bilbao, ranking 10th there recently as well. So Kai's been doing great. Congratulations. Gabor finished in top 4, playing Mew VMAX. Fairly traditional list, slightly thinner on the Mew line, 3-2 line as opposed to 4-3 or 4-2. To find space for a Marnie as well as a 4th Rotom Phone and a 4th Stadium. Looks to play the Psychic Energy. I think that's still pretty respectable at the moment for things like Whimsicott. But overall, I can definitely see going back to maybe the triple double turbo build if you're not too worried about Whimsicott and Beedrill, because it feels like they've fallen off a little bit, though we did see 1 or 2 Beedrills here and there over the weekend. It feels like Whimsicott has really fallen off quite hard. But yeah, again, pretty standard list, crams and phones. I really like phones, especially in a format where people are trying to play lots of paths against you. So heavy phones plus 4 count of stadiums means you have plenty of outs to path. I'm still a big fan of the Pumpkaboo build. I'm playing Psychic Energy because you get to play Fog Crystal as well. Looks like this list isn't playing Fog. But yeah, regardless, I'm still a big fan of the list, just being as consistent as possible. Excuse me, I still like 4 Mew. But yeah, that's my only sort of qualm with the list. I am a huge fan of phones. I have them basically the whole time. So yeah, really appreciate still playing the phones and still respecting Path in some capacity. And then Stefan Ivanov was rounding out the top 4. Another fantastic result. Playing Arceus Intel with a Dunsparce and a Manaphy as well. Pretty standard list, to be honest. Cross switches in here, very similar to the list played by Henry and Matthew Burris, who played in the Perth Regionals the weekend before. Matthew ended up winning that Regionals, so pretty similar to this. I think he said there was like 2 or 3 cards different. I can't remember the exact counts of some of the different cards, but you can see it's got that double cross switcher to be able to go for a Sharon's Care plus Boss, or a Melanie plus Boss, or an Avery plus Boss, or Avery plus Gust, I guess, not Boss, kind of play. Yeah, lots of different one-offs. I like the addition of Tool Scrapper. I don't think they played that initially. Makes sense with the rise of Jolteon over the past couple of weeks. I still think it's kind of hard to find, I must admit. But yeah, it's a nice one-off that I think is necessary in some Inteleon decks just because there's no other great counter. So yeah, makes a lot of sense to me. I also really like the Avery and the Collapse Stadium, both of them trying to disrupt the opponent a little bit here and there. A lot of the time, there's not sort of off turns with Arceus. You need to be using a specific supporter like a Boss or a Sharon's Care or a Melanie. But there will be odd turns where you do have like a turn of Breathing Room to get to use a supporter you want. And Avery, I think, is a great one just for that additional disruption. It can be pretty strong. As well as Avery plus cross switches sometimes being able to deal with like EV plus Jolteon in a turn because Avery get rid of their Jolteon, Avery get rid of their EV and then cross switch up the Jolteon, and you're able to basically guarantee a turn of Inteleon there, which is pretty good. It's quite hard to pull off, but when it happens, I think it's pretty much game winning because you can just unlock all of your combos again. But yeah, pretty simple list. Still really liking the captures, to be honest. And yeah, just kind of pretty standard. Ultra Ball in a 2 count is interesting because I feel like we've seen a lot more lists playing it as a 1 count and 3 Evo Incense. So I'd be interested to find out why he felt it was more important as a 2 count, but having ways to get water into the bin is pretty important, and obviously it's more flexible than Evo Incense. So I would imagine it's just something along those lines. But yeah, I think other than that, the list is pretty standard, to be honest. It looks very similar to the winning list from the previous weekend. Dimitri Eaton, a great UK player, finally got his first top 8 this weekend playing Arceus Intel Beedrill. So yeah, congratulations to him. Again, fairly standard list. Excuse me. Fairly standard list, just trying to weave in the mustard here and there, as opposed to having to Starbirth for it. You get to Inteleon for it. No super crazy counts. I'm pretty sure most of this stuff is pretty standard by now. There's not too much room for adaptation in this list just because the list is so tight, trying to fit in the mustard package, while still having access to Sharon's Care and Marnies and Bosses and all of this kind of stuff. But yeah, pretty standard list. Great to see him have a strong result though, so congratulations, Dimitri. Patrick Landis was actually a player I played against in Swiss, who played Mew VMAX 3-3 line, pretty interesting counts there. And yeah, again, just respecting Path, playing for stadiums, played the big Parasol to help out with things like Beedrill. I don't know how much use he saw out of it, but makes a lot of sense. You know, Beedrill is still pretty respectable, especially when playing the full Fusion Energy and 3 double turbo build. You know you're going to have the special energy on, so why not protect yourself a little bit with the big Parasol? Yeah, again, I feel like personally, with the Rose Tower and Old Cemeteries in here, I would just rather see full Tower of Darkness just because they are useful outside of just being stadium counters for additional draw options. I think that's how I would personally play a quad or a triple double turbo build. But other than that, again, pretty solid list. Lots of switch outs and stuff. I was 1 turn away from being able to, unfortunately, path my way into a victory against Patrick. So we had a really, really close game, though. So yeah, great guy, great opponent. Congratulations for doing well. It was great to see. Miloslav ended up in 7th place with Mew as well. Again, don't have the list, but you can see he's been on a bit of a tear recently. 24th at Frankfurt, 30th at Bilbao, and then 7th at Bremen. Really doing very well recently, so congratulations. And finally, Stefano Carter played Arceus Urshifu. So again, one of these sort of more toolboxy style builds. Also weaving in a Jolteon package, which is pretty impressive. Playing the Crobats, playing the Urshis instead of like Zapdoses and stuff, as well as a Hooper for other Urshis and things like that. Yeah, there's a lot. I feel like there's a lot going on in a list like this, so it's difficult to sort of really analyze how successful each of the options is going to be, especially when you're limited to like a 2-2 Arceus and all of this kind of stuff. But I think Arceus Urshi Jolteon, at least, was a very, very Interesting call for the weekend. Pretty strong at that. And weaving in a Dark Attacker makes a lot of sense as well. I'm still not the biggest fan of Crobat as an attacker. I know it's been quite popular recently, but I'm not the biggest fan personally. But it does give you options to be able to play things like the Battle VIP passes with a little bit more flexibility, because you have a bit more push draw in the first couple of turns, which is quite nice. Looks like I also played the Luminia as well to help out. And it lets you play things like Piers and stuff and have more of an out to being able to make things like that work. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm not super sold on Crobat as an attacker still, though it did do really well this weekend. I still feel like there's some inherent sort of vulnerabilities with the 300 HP 3-prizer. But regardless, it was great to see a pretty unique list do well. Nice to see still, again, more innovation working with Arceus. It really is a card that breeds a lot of different decks. So great to see. Yeah, pretty cool list. So that wraps up Bremen. We will take a quick look at Vancouver, where Parker Lish was able to take down the tournament again with a Crobat VMAX. So it's clearly working, even though I'm not the biggest fan. Playing a more... I don't want to say control-y style build, but having a bit more control over what opponents can do, playing the Crushing Hammers and the Fan of Waves, that kind of thing, looks to be pretty annoying in a format like this. It feels like Arceus plus Hammers is something that people have always talked about but never really done, never really pulled the trigger on. It turns out this weekend, Parker decided to cram them into the deck and see how it fared, and it looked pretty impressive, to be honest. Oranguru was also a really nice card that we saw a lot of use out of, both from this list and the second place list. Just kind of protecting yourself through other people's Marnies and protecting more resources pre-research and things like that. It's a fantastic card that really isn't seeing too much play at the moment, so I really like it. But yeah, we kind of know the deal with these Arceus lists now. You play Arceus, you then play a type of Pokemon to help your coverage, and you play some sort of... Usually it's two types of Pokemon. In this case, it's one type of Pokemon plus some other disruption in the Crushing Hammers and Fan of Waves. The interesting thing about this list is it's all 2-prize based, which is a bit scary. I think you really do rely on having a good setup and your 2 prizes being able to trade quite well. You kind of get yourself back into the game by trying to Crushing Hammer and Fan of Waves away Muse Energy, which makes a lot of sense. But I'm still very cautious of playing a heavy 2-prize build into a Mew meta, even with all of these different ways of disrupting them, plus the path as well. There's a lot of things you can do to try and disrupt them, but it still feels like not having some kind of draw power that isn't 2-prize based is a bit scary. But admittedly, you only need 1 or 2 turns against them to be able to just trade on their Genesect and stuff like that. You're playing 3 boss, so it's pretty doable, to be honest. And on top of that, all of these energy denial cards are pretty good in the Arc Mirror, because if you're able to find one in the early turns, it forces like a Melanie or out of them to be able to even Trinity Nova on the following turn sometimes, which is huge, because that can be very difficult to do. Sometimes you have to spend their Starburst to do it. So if you're able to combine that with a Path to the Peak or something, excuse me, if you're able to combine that with a Path to the Peak or something, that's pretty brutal. It forces them to find an out to dealing with a Stadium, then to maybe even Starburst just to go for a Trinity Nova just to get an attack, whereas you're just manually attaching and being like, yeah, I'll just attack at some point during this game, without sort of having to worry about when you're disrupting me. So yeah, I think the Hammers, if they get into the game, the Hammers are pretty dead, right? Because they're just accelerating so much energy, they're kind of pointless. But they can slow down the opponent. We know Arceus Mirror is about who gets the first energy on, who gets the first attack off. Essentially who goes first in a lot of instances. So trying to flip that when you're going second and trying to be the person that gets to attack first because you've been able to get rid of one of their energy is a really, really interesting strategy, and it clearly worked pretty well this weekend. Like I say, they become quite dead in the late game, I think, of Arceus Mirrors, just because there's so much energy being flooded onto the board. They're kind of doing nothing. They're not anywhere near as disruptive as they are in the early turns, but they provide so much tempo in the early turns, it makes a lot of sense. So yeah, even plays the 1 water energy to be able to Rain Splash with Manaphy, or I would imagine more often than not use Luminia's attack to jump back in. So that's one way of, I guess, protecting yourself against some of these decks that try and gust and KO your 2 prizes, you can jump back in with Luminion, which is pretty funny. But yeah, congratulations, Parker. Great result. Tord went over to Vancouver to try and take down one of the North American regionals and got incredibly close. Played Urshifu to a 2nd place finish. Again, pretty similar to some of his previous lists. I think one of the only particularly big changes was the Oranguru, which he said was really, really useful. And again, I really like the Oranguru. We know there's lots of people trying to counter these decks with things like Marnie and stuff like that. So being able to store an Incense on the top, or store a Level Ball, or a Drizzile, or an Inteleon, or whatever, I just know that I'm either top decking that, which is great, or I'm getting Marnied into it, which is also great. Seems really, really important. Other than that, lots of one-offs as per usual with these kinds of decks, lots of different options. They take a week and a day to even start to unwrap as to how you actually play the decks perfectly. But Tord's been playing this for months and months and months and has perfected the art of trying to go for this style of Inteleon box deck. So makes sense that he was able to do really well. Another fantastic result from Tord. Yeah, nothing too different from the list we've seen in the past. Looks like he's dropped a little bit on the Dark package, maybe realising that there's more decks that can counter Mew now. Down to 1 Moltres, 4 Dark, where I think at one point he was at 2 Moltres and 5 Dark. But that could have been some of the other lists. But yeah, either way, slightly thinner Moltres package than we've seen in some of these styles of decks in the past, but still enough to be able to bully the Mew decks as and when you need to. Drew Kennett was going for his 2nd regional win of the season, playing Arceus Gyarados. A really thin line of Gyarados, just that 2-1. I guess kind of saying there's matchups where I don't really need it. It's just in the it's really good in certain matchups. It's really good at just dealing with 2 prizes turn after turn. But there's certain matchups where it's just not particularly necessary, or I can grab it as and when I need it. Because of that, also cutting down a memory capsule as well, saying I'll sometimes be using Get Angry, but sometimes I just won't even end up using the card. I'll just be relying on the back of Jolteon plus Arceus to disrupt people. Also play the Fan of Waves, so it looks like Energy Disruption is slowly creeping back into the format, which makes sense to me, because this whole format has been about who gets to attack with Arceus first in a lot of instances, so makes a lot of sense to me to try and gain the tempo back if you end up going second. Yeah, other than that, pretty standard list. Not too dissimilar to Key's list from the previous week. Some slightly different counts. But yeah, in general, I think this is... I still ever so slightly prefer Malamar, but I still think this is a real contender. This is like a more aggressive version, whereas the Malamar VMAX deck is like the more disruptive version overall. But yeah, other than that, pretty standard stuff. I would like to see like a second switching out along with the... Well, a third switching out, I guess, because Airballoon is also one. But yeah, a third switching out, I think, is the main card I wanted from Key's list that hasn't been added to this list. So that would be one thing I would be looking for myself. As well as I would like to go back up to either 4th Incense or 4th Ultra Ball, just because finding Pokemon is still super important for this deck. Especially when you don't have the Inteleon engine to back you up. You're relying on Raw Draw from Bibarel and Crobat. It feels super bad having to spend your 1 Quick Ball on a Crobat to try and find a Pokemon plus another Quick Ball because you need everything. So having more ball search outs like an Ultra Ball or even an Evo Incense to help you get into the game once you've found your Pokemon in the early turns is pretty important, I think. But yeah, pretty standard list. Close to getting 2 regional wins but not quite able to make it. Arceus Corviknight was the other top 4 list. Again, fairly similar to some of the lists we've seen recently. Arceus paired with a couple of different VMAX Pokemon and not an Inteleon engine, essentially. Deciding to, a lot of these decks, as we've seen, decide to play the Jolteon engine. Deciding to cut the Jolteon engine and say, everyone else is playing Jolteons, I can save some space and I get to play some of my own cards, which is pretty impressive. Fire is nowhere at the moment, so Corviknight is really quite tanky. Plus, again, 240 just tears through stuff. Tears through 2 prize stuff pretty efficiently. Similar to Gyarados, but 1 less energy, which is really cool. As well as not being affected by things like abilities, as well as having free retreat. All of it's just these are kind of the benefits to Corviknight over something like Gyarados. Is capped at damage, is capped at 240, I guess 270 with the belt. But with Belt plus Ziggy, that's still 280, which is still great damage, to be honest. And you've even got things like Clutch on the Corviknight V to help out in a awkward spot. And then Dark Energy in the Dark package as well, just to help in dealing with Mew in that instance as well. Yeah, nothing too crazy. Tool Scrap is an interesting one. I'm assuming that's primarily for things like Big Charms, because the deck is kind of capped on its damage output. So I think Big Charms is probably what the Tool Scrapper was in here for. I can't be certain, but I'm pretty sure you're not that worried about any of these like Jolteon decks or anything like that. You have one new minion, so you're not really that fussed. So I guess also getting rid of things like Choice Belts and stuff to help you maintain that tankiness against some of these decks as Corviknight. But yeah, I think Big Charms is probably the thing that it was in here for the most. But yeah, I like Corviknight. Corviknight's a really cool Pokemon that I feel has been pretty underutilized. So cool to see it getting a little bit more light or daylight, I guess. Again, I like high path the peak counts in a lot of these decks, but yeah. Another Rapid Strike Urshi list. This was Justin Bakari's top 8 list. Slightly different, as you can see. Not playing playing some different one prizes. Playing the Celebi V to help out. Sorry, the Celebi Amazing Rare to help out with Hooper V. That comes in to try and punish an Urshi. You can one-shot them in return with Energy Press. Plus Choice Belt, which is pretty cool. It's a big swing of damage, to be honest. So yeah, I like it as because basically a lot of these decks just put an Urshi down and there's very little put a Hooper down and there's very little you can do about it. Even if they're doing it early in preparation for your Urshi, you can then take the tempo back before they even got to attack with the Celebi and just Energy Press KO them, and then they have to try and get it back and attach to it again with Arceus to even make it a threat in the game at a later date. So I really like the Celebi, to be honest. I think Joe played Rapid Strike Urshi this weekend, and he said he definitely would be playing Celebi going forward. So yeah, really cool to see. Plus it's an Amazing Rare. We don't see Amazing Rares get played too often, so always exciting to see that. But yeah, pretty standard stuff otherwise. Lots of one-ofs, you know the deal with these Inteleon-style decks. Playing the one-of Mew. I like at least one Mew or one Snorlax, or even one of both, just because some additional draw outs to help you against things like the Jolteon decks, I think is pretty important. The deck, like this kind of build looks pretty rough against the Jolteon deck because it's only got one boss and there's no Scrapper or anything. And while Scrapper and boss are kind of hard to find, at least having them at least having a Scrapper plus having a second boss here and there can help you deal with the Jolteon. So yeah, I'd be a little bit scared of Jolteon lists playing a list like this. But regardless, they're still, at the end of the day, the Jolteon lists are still pretty inconsistent. So there's no major worry, I guess. Another Arc Intel, again, very similar to the list that Matthew Burris won with the weekend before. Playing a Leon to help with some maths, I guess that helps reach, what would it be, 240 plus some Inteleon pings is close to 280, or 260 if you've been able to just go for pure or no double turbos, which again is really close to 280. So Leon helping out, get some cheeky KOs here and there. Can't see it being overly useful personally. I think double Sharon's Care is really, really good in Arceus at the moment because you can just out-resource so many Arceus mirrors. So I'd personally be looking for a more defensive build if I was playing Arceus, I think, going into the final weekend of Brilliant Stars. But having the aggression, especially being able to just Leon out of nowhere and kind of still reach important numbers whilst Big Charmed or in combination with Choice Belt plus Inteleon pings, is pretty impressive, to be honest. Finally, we have a couple of Mew lists. We have Liam Kids, who I didn't quite see who it was. Okay, same as the fourth place list from New Jersey there. Again, catcher build. I feel like we saw less catchers this weekend. I think people are moving away from catchers again a little bit. But I think you can never really argue with catcher build at the moment. It's still very popular. Also playing the big Parasol and playing a Palpad as well. Palpad's always an interesting one. I'm really not the biggest fan of Palpad, especially not in like a Marnie based list. I don't like it in Marnie, in the Marnie builds, but I don't hate it as much. But it feels really weird to play it in a list like this because you're playing less boss, which makes you want to Palpad more, but also it means that you're more likely to not see bosses early to be able to power pad back in. So you have to spend to be able to spend the power pad. You sometimes have to like just spend it on one sparkle just to get it out of your hand if you can't discard it or whatever. So that's something that like I'm still not sold on power pad in the catcher build. It makes sense because there's less bosses, but also mathematically it kind of is a little bit awkward because you're less likely to have a boss as a target, which makes the card a lot weaker. Whereas in like the triple boss plus Marnie builds, there's so many situations where you'll see one of those 4 supporters and you can just bin them off and then power pad for them later on. So yeah, to me, it's a little bit counterintuitive. The maths doesn't work out as well. But yeah, that's just me personally. I'm still not the biggest fan of catcher builds anyway. I've never played catchers in mine. And I don't think I will be this weekend if I play Mew again. But we'll see. Stranger things have happened. And yeah, the last list is also another catcher-based build. We've got, again, we do have a Marnie in here, so still not certain whether Marnie is considered staple at this point. We've seen some lists play it, some lists not. I know a lot of Europeans I spoke to this weekend still feel it's incredibly mandatory because there's so many of like the Inteleon one prize dark decks over in Europe, and it's one of the best ways to counter them. So yeah, I think it's arguably still pretty important, but it's a card that I just never really want to see. I never really want to have to play it, but sometimes you do just have to. But yeah, other than that, again, a pretty standard list overall. Yeah, nothing too much to say about Rowan's list. So yeah, thanks very much for watching. Nothing, like I say, no huge creativity. I feel like we are really wrapping things up, but Philip and Parker both winning with very different lists does show there is still room for some sort of spice here and there. As we go into the final week, we'll have to wait and see whether any of the regionals or special events this weekend provide any final new builds to look at, or whether we're pretty much done ahead of Astral Radiance and the regionals and then NAIC. So yeah, thanks very much for watching. I've been Jack from Omnipoke, and I look forward to seeing you guys in another video soon. Cheers, everyone.